Students do better in school when their parents or families are involved in their education. But with 1 in 4 students in the US speaking a language other than English at home, chances are high that many of those parents will speak another language or come from another culture or country where the education system is very different to what it is here in the United States. So today we'll talk about 5 things that you can do as a teacher to make sure to build the great rapport with those parents and have those meetings be a success for both you, the parents, and the student. Point number 1, get parent and student names right. Names hold a lot of import in many cultures, so it's important to pronounce them correctly or maybe even learn a little bit more about them. So when you have those initial meetings, make sure to learn how the parents prefer to be called, and it may not be their first name. So ask them how they like to be referred to, put in that effort, but also ask about the student's name. It's important to learn how to pronounce the students' names correctly rather than looking for a short form or something that might be easier to pronounce in your language. Putting in that effort shows that you value what they value, and it's a great way to build rapport. Point number 2, use clear, unambiguous language. That means drop the idiomatic expressions, the idioms, the slang, figurative language, anything that might lower the clarity of your message. A good way to see if you're doing that would be to listen to what you're saying. And if you were to interpret the words literally, would it still mean what you intend? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably using very clear, unambiguous language, which is a great skill to have, especially as we go into point 3, rely on expert language resources. So whether that's sign language interpreters for deaf parents or expertly translated materials that you're going to be using throughout the year, make sure to have that done professionally. You can check with your school administrators to see how to make sure that you have interpreters available for those very important meetings. And those interpreters can be in person, which is the preferred method for most sign language interpreters. There's over the phone interpreting for spoken language. But for these meetings that you have, these initial conferences, it's much better to have an interpreter there in person or over a video platform. And you can find out exactly how to get those interpreters, again, from your school administrators. It's important that these resources are made available, and it's the law here in the US. Point number 4, actively support parent involvement and communication. That might mean putting in a little bit of extra effort to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. Be mindful that a nod from a parent doesn't necessarily mean I understand what you're saying, just that I'm listening. So if you suspect that perhaps understanding's not happening, put things in slightly different ways, ask more questions, and perhaps even ask parents to explain back what they think they understood. Point number 5, for parent, student, teacher conferences or meetings, make the focus on relationship, not just on information sharing. When different people in different cultures meet, it's often for very different reasons. And in the US, it's very often to share information, to get information, or to come to decisions. But in other cultures, it's more about establishing that relationship. So take the time. You might even take a little extra time if you need to work through an interpreter, or you just want to make sure that the parents have ample opportunity to ask the questions they need answered and to make sure they have the information that they need. If you do have to counsel a meeting, make sure to be very apologetic and make sure you give a good reason. I recently spoke to some Afghani students who had graduated from high school here in the US after moving here from Afghanistan a few years ago. And I asked, what were some things that really struck you as different or maybe even came across as rude in the way that you were communicated with here in the US? And one thing they said was when we had a meeting or an appointment, that needed to be counseled, often somebody would call and say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we have to cancel our meeting for tomorrow. We need to reschedule it. When's a good time for you?" And that came across as a bit direct and even rude. Remember, in many other cultures, the reason you have a meeting is to strengthen that relationship. So it needs to be taken seriously. So keep these 5 tips in mind. And for more information on language and culture, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. In this series, Across Language and Culture, will be covering a lot more information. And if this was useful to you, go ahead and hit like. Thank you.